Hello there, it's Sarah from Paper Lovely. Thanks for joining me today. I have got part 1 of my 10 cards 1 kit using the Simon Says Stamp July card kit for you today. So I'm going to start out here by unboxing what's in the kit so you can have a look at everything that was included. So here, before I start creating my cards, I knew I was going to be using a lot of these bees as they were the main element from the stamp set. So I'm going to start out by stamping and coloring a whole bunch of them. I'm going to use my Copic, so I'm stamping here with my Memento Tuxedo Black ink. This is my favorite to use with any Copic coloring because the ink will not bleed. And then I did really simple coloring here, just doing a yellow and gray stripe and then adding some of my light blue for the wings. The colors I'm using are Y35, N4, and BG10. Once I'm finished with the coloring, I'm going to take this over to my scan and cut and I will trim all of these out. I did also off camera stamp several of these out using just my Lawn Fawn Minty Fresh ink, and I've also used my scan and cut to trim those out. So here for this first card, I've trimmed down this yellow and white honeycomb pattern paper to 4x5 1/4. There I've used my ruler to cut a straight line. My original plan was to curl both of these ends under to sort of give it a rounded look. I was trying to create sort of a hive look. And then as I was working with this, I really didn't like the way that it was folding. So you'll see that I messed with it for a little while here. And I did want to have some of the honeycomb sticking underneath there. So I'm positioning that. But then as I finish up, you'll see I end up actually curling these the opposite direction. And I like the look of that much better, and it sat much better on the card front. So I've grabbed these two honeycomb pieces. I used the die that was included to trim those out and some scrap MFT black licorice cardstock. So I'm going to use this new glue pad and go ahead and place these down. Now I will say, having used the glue sponge, I was really excited about this. I think it's a great idea, but because there was so many openings, this was so intricate, I ended up getting a lot of glue on my fingers. And if you don't mind that, then this would be the product for you. But for me, it was just driving me crazy. I was constantly wiping off my fingers. So I haven't given up on it quite yet. I think I'm going to try using it for some larger pieces and then also more solid pieces so that my fingers aren't getting quite as sticky. You'll see I use this again throughout to do some more of the honeycomb, and you do get a glue residue around it that you can see on the card, which I'm just not quite a fan of, but I do think it's a great idea and I am going to keep playing with it to figure out the best way for me to be able to use it. So there you can see I've gone ahead and stamped one of those little dotted lines as well as a sentiment thanks for being there. I used my VersaFine Onyx black ink for that. And now I've gone ahead and popped up my bees using some of my sticky thumb pop dots. I'm going to place one down right between my two folds. I had a little bit of a tear in the paper there, so I wanted to be able to go ahead and cover that up. And then I will add this other bee up at the top of that dotted sort of movement line. Finally, I'm going to use my pokey tool here, and I'm just going to curl the edges of both of those little triangles to give that a little bit more dimension. For the inside, I've got one of my trusty Nina panels trimmed to 4x5 1/4. I'm going to stamp out the sentiment, "You're the bee's knees." Again, I'm using my Onyx Black ink there. Then I grabbed a scrap of my Paper Tray Ink Aqua Mist cardstock, just trimmed off about 1/4 inch of that, added some Scor-Tape behind it, and I'm going to place that along the bottom of my panel. This is one of my favorite ways to finish off a card. It just adds a little bit of color, a little bit of something extra on the inside. I'll add some ATG to the back of that panel and then go ahead and place that on the inside of my card base. And that will complete card number 1. So here for card number 2, I'm going to take this blue honeycomb pattern paper. I really loved this blue color. It's sort of an indigo. It's a very, very dark turquoise, and it went beautifully with that light blue color that they had included with the cardstock. So I'm going to start out here by stamping out Beautiful You, and as you saw, I did a little bit of stamp surgery there, just trimming off the U from the Yule sentiment. And I've lined these two up here. I'm going to stamp them out using my Lawn Fawn Minty Fresh ink. Then I'm going to add some of my Scor-Tape behind that. You can see I also have some of the bees that I have stamped out, again using that Minty Fresh ink. So I'm going to go ahead and peel away the backing on my Scor-Tape here, and I'm going to place that right along the bottom of that panel. Then I'll add some ATG to the back of my panel and place that on the top of my card base. Finally, I've grabbed some of my mini wobblers, and they were just about the perfect size to fit behind those bees. So I'm going to add one to each of them. I like to put my cardstock or whatever I'm going to have wobbling, I like to put that on the plastic, the hard plastic side of the wobblers. I think it helps it move a little bit better. Adds a little more weight to what's going to be moving around. I'm going to line those up here, and then I will peel away the backing on that sticker side. It's like a thin sort of acetate. And I'll go ahead and place each of these down. For the inside, I'm again on a Nina panel trimmed to 4x5 1/4. I'm going to stamp out the sentiment Sweet as Can Be, again using that Minty Fresh ink. Here I've grabbed the leftover piece of that honeycomb pattern paper, and I'm going to trim out one row of the honeycomb here. You'll see I'm going side to side. I found that was the easiest to try and keep as much of that white border as I could. And then I'm going to add some of my art glitter glue behind there, and I'll place that along the bottom of my panel and trim off the excess. I'll add some ATG to the back of that panel and place that on the inside of my card base. And that will complete card number 2. So here for card number 3, I decided I wanted to create a shaker card, and I've grabbed some black licorice cardstock that's from MFT from my stash, and I trimmed out a panel that measures the full size of my card front, so that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I did go ahead, if you can see there, and I took my ruler and I marked off about 1/4 inch around all 4 sides, just so I knew I'm going to cover this with some acetate and a frame. So I wanted to just see the part that was going to be noticeable from the outside that the frame wasn't going to cover, and that's how I used everything to lay out where I wanted to place this die cut. So I'm saving both of the little inside pieces as well as the frames. I'm going to use some of each of these on the front of the card here. And I've sped this up and sort of cut a few things out of it so you don't have to watch the full process, but I did do this several times and I varied the position of it. I had it sometimes going off the edge, again knowing that I would have that frame to give me a nice black border all the way around. And I'm just using some post-it tape here. I recently picked up this Gemini Junior and I am still getting used to it because you actually have to cut backwards. You're placing the die down with the cutting face up and then adding the cardstock on top of that. So the way that I have figured this out that works best for me is to actually place the die down and then use some of my post-it tape and then flip everything over and run it through. That seems to be the way that works best for me, but I do like it. It's a lot less work because it's motorized and it pulls the plates and everything through for you. So there you can see I've also cut out a frame. I used my MFT Blueprints 32 frame die to trim this out. It's a perfect 1/4 inch all the way around. And it fits the front of a card perfectly. So when I'm doing something like this, I often go to this die. I've added some acetate there, trimmed everything down, and again added Scor-Tape all the way around the edge of that frame. I'm going to peel off the top and then about halfway down from the sides. I'm going to line this up, that way I don't have too much sticky hanging around there, and I can easily get all of those corners lined up. And then as I get that in place, I will remove the backing from each of the sides and then eventually from the bottom. So now that I've got my top all put together, I am going to add a little bit more detail to that. I've grabbed these honeycomb pieces that were cut out, and I am going to place those all over the top here, exactly in the place where I had originally cut them out. So some will fall off the edge and some will be the whole piece. And where it went over the frame, I just left it there. I thought it gave it some extra detail and I really liked that. I'm going to place all of these down. Here you'll see again I've got the sticky fingers and there is a little bit of that glue sort of hanging around on the acetate. I decided just to let that go. I wasn't going to be super picky since this was a new product that I was trying out, but I think if I were to do this again, I would probably add some double-sided tape to the back of those when I trim them out and just place them down that way so I don't have that extra stickiness on my fingers. You will see when I flip this over that I did take some of the inside honeycomb pieces as well, not all of them, but a few, and just added some extra on the top and also in between the die cuts to give this a little bit more movement. It's not super noticeable on camera because it is black on black, but in person it gives really great texture. So here I'm going to create the outside edges for my shaker. I'm using some 1/8 inch Scotch foam tape and I'll create a well. I'm using a double thickness of this around all 4 edges. Here I've got my black card base. I'm going to add this entire pack of sequins on top here, and then I will peel away the backing and go ahead and place this down. And there is my shaker. Next, I've grabbed a scrap piece of some Paper Tray Ink Harvest Gold cardstock, and I'm going to stamp out the sentiment "Smart as can be." I put that smart on an angle there. I am going to use a pen and sort of make a little carrot underneath that. I've added some of my ATG behind here, and I'm going to place this across the bottom of the front of my card. And here I'll grab my mono pen. This came in one of the My Monthly Hero kits, and I really love it. I've been using it on a lot of cards lately. I have one additional frame that I've cut out of that black licorice cardstock. I'm adding some ATG to the back of that. And then I'm going to place that down on top of this yellow piece, but I did line it up with the honeycomb that was below it, just to make sure all my lines and everything were matching. And I've grabbed this bee here with the glasses. He was my favorite. Again, added some of my sticky thumb pop dots to him, and I'm going to place him right on top of that honeycomb. For the inside, I've again got my Neenah panel trimmed to 4x5 1/4. Going to stamp out the sentiment Be Yourself, and then I will use that BG10 from my Copic markers. I stamped this again using my Memento Tuxedo Black ink. I've gone ahead and colored that in. I'll add some ATG to the back and place that here on the inside of my card base. And that will complete card number 3. So after the busyness of that shaker card, I'm keeping this one really simple. This background pattern paper really did a lot of the work for me. I loved the mix of the two patterns. I'm trimming that down here to 4x5 1/4, and I pulled in some blue cardstock from my stash. This is MFT's After Midnight. It's one of my favorite navy blues. I'm going to take that dotted line heart with a little bee there, as well as the sentiment Meant to Be, and I have lined up that sentiment so that the majority of it will be on the white portion of those stripes. I'll stamp that out using my VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And I'm going to go ahead and add that to the top of my card base. I found that when I use this type of ink, if I don't want to, it doesn't dry super quickly and I don't want it to smear. So I found that it's easier to actually place the ATG on the top of my card base and then place my panel down. Here I've grabbed these two little love bees that are positioned together, and I had previously used them on another card that I didn't like, so I ended up tearing that apart. So I do have some pop dots behind there, but I added a little bit of art glitter glue there just to make sure that they're stuck down nice and tight. For the inside, I'm again on my Neenah panel, trimmed to 4x5 1/4, and I'm stamping out the sentiment We Belong Together using my Onyx Black ink. And then I'll add in a few of these little hearts and stamp that using the Lawn Fawn Minty Fresh. I'll add some ATG to the back of that and place that on the inside of my card base. And that will complete card number 4. So here for card number 5, I am again using a piece from another card that I had pulled apart. I had used this really beautiful flower pattern paper, but just didn't like the way that everything looked in the end. So I had already stuck that down to some of the to a black card base, and I wanted to save this because I thought it was so pretty. So I've trimmed that down to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. It's going to be slightly smaller than my usual panel. And I've added some ATG all around the back of that. So my plan here was to create sort of a hive look with that white, off-white color that they are. And then I was going to have the bees sort of sticking in that. I'm really happy with how this came out. It was sort of an organic project as I was going. But once I added in the last couple colors with that off-white rather than the white string, it started to look like what I really wanted it to look like. So I've gone ahead and added several different from my stash. I just used until until I ran out and then pulled in another color. One of them is a baker's twine with a little bit of gold to give that a little bit of sparkle to go along with the yellow. So I've added some 1/2-inch Scor-Tape all along the back of this, about 5 pieces, and I really pressed that down, which is why I'm having trouble getting up the edges here, because with all of this dimension, I want to make sure this is nice and stuck down tight to the top of my card base. So once I get all of that peeled, I'm going to go ahead and place this down on one of the yellow card bases. And I have laid out my bumblebees, but I haven't put them in position yet. I'm just sort of deciding where I want to place everything. I've grabbed some leftover black cardstock and I'm going to stamp out the sentiment just because. So I'm going to emboss this. I'm using my Versamark clear embossing ink. And then you'll see here, I'm going to go ahead and add some Simon Says Stamp fine detail white embossing powder, and I will heat set that and then trim that just around the edges of my sentiment. And I'm going to go ahead and stick that sentiment sort of stuck in that hive as well. I'm going to put down 2 or 3 of the edges just tucked underneath that string. And in the center there, I've added a couple pop dots. I just pulled apart the string to make sure that those stuck down nice and tight on the paper. And then that way this string can sort of wrap around the pop dots. And here I'm adding one more small one just to make sure that that corner there is nice and steady. There you can see I'm sort of spreading apart the strands to stick that in between. So I have cut it out because this video is getting quite long, but I did the same thing with each of the bees. I just added one of my largest pop dots, spread the strings apart, and placed those down. Here for the inside, I've got a Nina panel, of course, trimmed to 4x5 1/4, and I'm going to stamp out these 2 honeycomb pieces using that Lawn Fawn Minty Fresh. I'm going to leave the inside blank, that way I can use this card for just about anything. I'll add some ATG to the back, and again place this on the inside of my card base. And that will complete card number 5. Here are a few close-ups of the finished cards. In the description box below, you'll find my blog post, which has additional photos and links to the supplies I used. If you enjoyed the video, please leave me a comment or a thumbs up and subscribe for more. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.